Hi, it's Betsy and Thomas at the American Intelligence Media, and today Thomas is going to help us understand why and what will be the repercussions of Republicans naming 8 potential impeachment witnesses. And I have the list. Thomas says he's going to run through them all. What do you want to say before we start naming them?
Well, first off, Betsy, this is a great idea because first and foremost, a priority. There is no impeachment investigation. There is an impeachment inquiry that has had a vote of confidence for a proposal for such a thing. They're not following any rules. As a matter of fact, they're making up all new administrative rules. Therefore, there is no impeachment, and there is no impeachment investigation. And so then it's basically a railroading of a false vote that will be taken from a number of committees, or even just one committee, with some planks of impeachment, some points of impeachment that should rise to high crimes and misdemeanors for the president, which of course there are none. And so that will simply go before the House, and they'll have another stupid kangaroo vote, know.
But what I was trying to understand is that Jim Jordan is going to be able to be on this committee now. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so I said, so he too can question these people. And you said, no, not necessarily.
Oh, yes. Technically, he should be able to. The new rules literally state, with every rule, there is a proviso, the last sentence, that it's completely up to the discretion of the chairman of that committee. So, will the president have representation? It's up to the chairman of the committee. The way it looks so far, that would be no. Will the Republicans get to ask any pointed questions? No. Will they get to act like they are asking some questions and then get cut off by whoever the chairman is? Yes. Will it go anywhere? No. Is it already a concluded vote before it even starts because it's a kangaroo court? Yes. Are each of these 4 committee heads simply hanging judges? Yes. Do they have any authority? No.
So if people weren't so brainwashed out there from their public school indoctrination, they would see this for what it is. It's a Soviet style, at least the way we were taught back in the 1950s, kangaroo court star chamber. And it's happening right here in America. But because our citizens don't understand what's going on, they're just, what? Impeachment? Impeachment? That's all the word they're following.
Correct. And they want to keep it going as a negative smear of Trump until the campaign. They don't want it to end. So they need to set up all this false evidence. So in a minute, we're going to go over who the the Democrats are calling. And then, you should go over the list. There is a list of what the Democrats want to call, and we can go down each one of those. But all of them are missing so many of the key people that we'd like to chime in, of course, in my own sarcastic way, about who they really should be calling and what they should be asking. And I think you and your team said, well, what if you ask some questions as if you were a Jim Jordan or you were the prosecutor and these people were on the stand? Now, remember, if these are members of the Congress, anyone who's questioned, they don't have to tell the truth. They can lie. Secondly, any member of Congress can lie throughout the proceedings. That's the reason that Adam Schiff hasn't been kicked off of the chairmanship of the Intelligence Committee after lying about President Trump and Zelensky's conversation. So I don't know. I don't know which should be the funniest. I think, first off, let me just say this. Who should they call? President Zelensky. They already have. They have his tweets. They have his phone calls with Trump. They have his public announcements and statements in his own country. And the very person that supposedly was having his arm twisted to have Joe Biden be revealed. Oh, wait. Has Joe Biden been revealed? No. Since then, all that time, has Joe Biden been revealed? No. They're still denying it even happened.
Well, if you're waiting for ABC, it might be 5 years out.
Correct. And the quid pro quo was not possible because USAID had been held up for a variety of reasons.
Please, quid pro quo exists everywhere. It's not a bad thing. I'll do this for you if you do this for me. It's just the way the world works. But they want to make it a dirty word. Not to say that that's what happened, but quid pro quo is not a dirty word. Now, can people use that for nefarious purposes? Of course.
Trade agreements are a quid pro quo.
Marriage is quid pro quo.
Foreign relations is quid pro quo in all instances. And with law and prosecution, Mueller went to 13 countries to use the very thing that they're saying that when Trump asked for, and had been asking, because the State Department had been asking for it, can you give us your anti-corruption report, Mr. Zelensky, as soon as you get your feet on the ground? And not only that, hey, we need you to, he's repeating, because this has already been requested by the State Department itself. Why? Because they had found out about the corruption of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. How could you not? We screamed about it when it happened. We told you before why Joe wouldn't throw his hat in the ring is because of his son and his son's dirty dealings, and we told you all about this. And so now it comes out in the news, long time after it happened. This was when they were in power, folks. Joe Biden was in charge of the Ukrainian foreign affairs. That is highly unusual. Besides Vice President George H.W. Bush under Reagan, I don't really know when anybody as a vice president has been given carte blanche with a specific country. Why? Because of the oligarchs. Who should they be calling? They should call Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort got Viktor Yanukovych, who would also be happy to testify, because he was kicked out of office twice by George Soros and the United States CIA and the rogue CIA, Americans for New Democracy and all the NGOs of Soros. $4.7 billion Victoria Nuland spent under Hillary Clinton and John Kerry in the Ukraine for the Orange Revolution and the Maidan Revolution, and for who gets the money from the state ex-Russian-run power companies, resource companies, gas, oil, natural gas, all this stuff. So it was a dividing up of the state of Ukraine to the oligarchs. And Joe Biden went over there like a fool and grabbed his piece, $900,000, Rosemont, Seneca. His son went over and got unbelievable amounts of millions. You don't even know. Nobody even knows. He was paid to be on those boards because of the corruption, because the corruption was everywhere, both sides. Both sides were corrupt. Viktor Yanukovych, who wasn't all that corrupt, and when he actually was as honest like Trump, and he said, well, you know what, I'm going to do a deal for the pipeline with Russia or the European Union, depending upon what's best for Ukraine. Boom, bang, they used that to kick him out. Who kicked him out? The social media. Who started the revolution in Iran? The social media, a couple dissidents. We don't even know if they exist. We don't know whether the CIA had killed them and they were just using them on social media. You can start revolutions on the social media. And so what we see going on in Ukraine, we saw two revolutions where a duly elected president was overthrown, and now they're doing the same thing in America against Trump. So who would I call? First person, Paul Manafort. Why do you think he's in solitary confinement? Because he knows the most about the corruption of it all. Then who? Alexandra Chalupa, who is on both
She's
Democrat.
on the list.
She's
yeah.
on the Democrat list, okay? Are they out of their minds?
No, and she's also on the Republican list.
Of course she should be on both the Republicans list, because she worked with Fusion GPS and Glenn Simpson on the Magnitsky Act and came into this country for the Trump Tower setup. She met with Glenn Simpson before and after the Trump Tower setup, which of course was arranged by another person I think who's on there, the beautiful Nellie Orr, who had a meeting with the head Privy Council attorney for the Queen and for the Parliament and for,
along with her husband Bruce, right here in Washington.
And her traitor
And it's in
husband,
testimony.
Bruce Orr.
We saw it in testimony that this occurred.
She admitted it all.
Right.
She said she put it all on a jump drive, all of her smear of Trump, which was fake, that she got from a ham radio by tuning into the names in public that they stuck in the report that nobody even, it was imaginary. And when John Brennan went to Russia, that's where he got the GRU names, by the way.
Let's put into people's mind in the context of this. All right, so Bruce and Nellie Orr, they're at the State Department, and Allison Saunders comes and meets with them privately, a private dinner in their Washington home. What would that be like over in Britain? Who would we send over to meet with whom?
That would be if William Barr snuck into Britain
Yes.
to meet with the Queen herself.
Oh, my goodness.
Essentially.
Okay.
Because she's the one in charge.
And it's in testimony, folks. We've read it ourselves in earlier testimony, and yet nobody there is talking about it. And the media is not talking about it.
These are the questions that I'd like to ask. Let me ask the questions. I would have so much fun because they wouldn't answer them, but in my questions, they would eventually shut me up, but I would give you the answers and the questions I'd be asking. And so I have, clever ways of saying to people, well, since it is broadly known from your testimony, Nellie Orr, that you had dinner with Allison Saunders, did you not? And she'd have to say yes or no, and I'd have her on record. And if she said no, we have her own sworn testimony. But then what would she be doing? Lying before Congress. You ever see anybody go to jail for lying before Congress? Yeah, except someone harassed like Roger Stone. But, the people who know what's going on, the real corruption is Victoria Nuland, who was really the inside, and Volker, and the other two stooges there from the State Department that are on the Democrat list. Those are subordinates. They can't whistleblow on what they don't know or understand. Okay, hold it. People don't understand that. Let's back up that truck. These people, first off, are not only second, third, fourth, fifth hand. One of them, Volker, got his only information from the New York Times. He was testifying on how he felt about what he read in the New York Times. Later...
Hello, that was the whole Mueller dossier, was citing the mainstream media.
And he came back, changed his testimony, as well as that other guy, Vind, whatever, that lieutenant colonel who was in the National Security Council, Vinson, whatever his name is. Anyway, he came back, changed his testimony. They all came to say, and they were being told, you must prove quid pro quo by what you know. Okay, if you're not the president, you're not supposed to know quid pro quo. Now, are you? Because you're not supposed to be in on those conversations unless you're sworn to secrecy. And a total oath of allegiance to the president you're working for, and anything else is sheer treason, treachery, sedition, and literally, he's a lieutenant colonel. He could be hung or shot.
Yeah, and he showed up in his military uniform, which suggests that the U.S. military supports this thug and his hard coup.
He's a soy boy placed there by John Brennan, one of the worst enemies of America in U.S. history. We will find out as time goes by, or some of us already know. And then you have the other stooges who are the State Department bozos working for Biden. So you got to call Biden, you got to call Joe and his son, but then you got to call his brother, and then you got to call the people he worked with, the whole Burisma, the whole BHR, the Bahari thing. You have to call all these people because they got the goods, but they're out of the country. And as we just found out in the Mueller investigation, thank you so much, I forget the name of that judge, whether it was Sullivan or Berman, Jackson, I can't remember. But anyway, they decided that we as a country can determine the law in another country. That was determined in the recent special counsel. That's why Mueller could go to 13 countries and use the force of the threat of the USAID, which he did, and so did Hillary, and every bit of emolument donations that went to her foundation came through threats of quid pro quo. As John Kerry did with Iran with $150 billion. We don't even know why we gave it to them. And the 1,500 spies who came into this country who are being slowly expelled.
Well, joke's going to be on them when we crash this Federal Reserve note and all that money they hold is worth nothing.
That's right. So we have to, as we go down that list, we have to call the infamous George Papadopoulos, because we have to find out the way that the whole setup ran. Because if you don't understand that the Crossfire Hurricane turned into the Committee for Impeachment, that was one of its 13 names, then you don't understand anything. The impeachment is the, at least 14th, 15th, 16th iteration or so of the Crossfire Hurricane, which was the
coup that Mark Zaid tweeted out on January 30th, 2017. It's the coup, people.
And then after that, what did he say? Hashtag impeachment.
Yes.
So from the beginning, with the 28 treasonous crimes of Comey, which you can read about in our intelligence reports, and the whole DNC setup with the server, and the whole CrowdStrike nonsense, and Dmitry Alperovich, we explained all of that to you, that was a complete fake. That was a complete attack against Trump before. So during the election, they call it election meddling, opposition research. After he's president-elect, that's called treason. Once he's the president, that's called an active regime change. And if you look closely, it's the 7 steps of the George Soros regime change plan, which he's used in 14 other color revolutions throughout the world, 2 of them in Ukraine. So you'd have to call Alexander Chalupa's sister and her cousin, because they were part of it. You'd have to call Rick Gates, Manafort's assistant, because he was right there with those three criminal oligarchs who ended up taking over the Ukraine, who were Joe Biden's buddies, who Joe Biden stood on the stage and received the highest award that Ukraine gives to Joe Biden. Remember, John McCain was there during the Maidan Revolution. He was the fomenter and the director of the Maidan Revolution, where people were shot and killed. John McCain, who we still have to hear the trash that he's a hero of America. Complete nonsense. Look at what he did in Ukraine. Just follow it back. Really? Really? We gave $4.7 billion to kill people in Ukraine because we didn't like who the Ukrainians elected as their president twice in a row? Yes, we did. That's what's going on in Ukraine. And as the new oligarchs were set up, as they overthrew Viktor Yanukovych, who was put into power by Paul Manafort. Now, remember, at the time, after they watched Manafort do this and they saw that he'd done it for 3 presidents in America before that, they said he's the number one enemy of the Democrats. They went after him. And so his friend Rick Gates got up to his eyes, and he didn't get prosecuted. He didn't get sent to jail, and he ain't telling no truth, is he? None of the corruption. Why aren't they calling Rick Gates, who knows more about the corruption in Ukraine, except for 2 other people who are not going to be called by the Democrats and should be called by the Republicans? John and his brother, what's his name? The Podesta brothers.
Oh, the Podestas, yeah.
So John Podesta
John and Tony.
Tony. I always call him. This time I didn't because I knew I always say it wrong. Tony. John and Tony. They were paid between their 3 companies and the 3 companies of Manafort in exactly the same way, to the almost the same exact. Well, they went to the same island, to Cyprian offshore accounts. They didn't go to the same bank. And the asset management they went through different places. Both the brothers Podesta and Manafort and Gates got paid the same amount of money for working for the same 3 oligarchs. What happened to Podesta brothers? They disappeared. Their companies are now dead. They got to file their FARA forms after the fact, after Mueller investigated them, but no, not Flynn. No, not Manafort, not Gates. Or Gates, maybe they did. Maybe that's why they let Gates off. But he turned state's evidence on his master, Paul Manafort, the genius that he is. And he's in solitary confinement, so he can't even tell another prisoner the truth because they're that afraid of him. They want him to die. I predicted he'd be the low-hanging fruit. Anybody could have caught him.
Well, it was Amy Berman Jackson that put him in jail, put him in prison. She was their judge.
Well, I also like to look at John Podesta's bunk buddy, Judge Leon, whatever his name is, at Washington University, where they share a course together, and
they teach a course together. And
Leon is looking at both of the cases against Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele in this country by the Russian oligarchs who were falsely named in the Steele dossier, and the case is going slower than anything you can possibly ever imagine. And Christopher Steele is losing so bad. Every time he opens his mouth, he gives the Republicans so much to talk about. Remember, it was Christopher Steele who said it was all unverified. None of it was verified. None of the Russian dossier impeachment attempt was verified. That's the reason Mueller couldn't do anything with it. What did Mueller finally do something with? Joseph Mifsud, calling him the Russian spy, and he's actually an American agent. We've shown you how he's been paid by America. And he was working with American agents in Britain and all the British agents. And he was actually a Maltese professor who'd worked in a variety in Scotland and other places. And then he went to work for the retired, basically, intelligence and State Department leaders in Italy. That's the reason 6 of them were fired overnight, because of the Joseph Mifsud insanity. I mean, George Papadopoulos was basically introduced to Simone Mangiamonti through the ex-Secretary of State, more or less, of Italy at Links Campus University, which is nothing more than a CIA training center. And anyone who would ever look at it could see that, because it was even the subjects on their syllabus and on their course offerings were all about intelligence, and it was all about terrorism. So if you're doing counterterrorism and you're doing intelligence, you rule the world these days, because that's where the big money is for cyber money. And that's where all they think they get the intelligence for the wars that happened. And that's usually false intelligence. So what we have going on there is the Dems need to call anybody who will say anything. It doesn't matter. They don't care. It's an inquiry. It's not an investigation. Of course, they're going to vote that the inquiry go forward. Of course, the inquiry is going to recommend impeachment, not an investigation, because in an investigation, there'd be lawyers on Trump's side. They'd get to ask questions. They wouldn't be told from the chairman of the committee that the witness can't answer a question or that the other side can't have lawyers in the room to help them. Everything is the upside down world, okay? And it's all the Adam Schiff, Nadler. And, well, look what happened. I won't say things bad. Look what happened to one of the chairman leadership. Now it's gone to a very evil person. You might as well put Hillary Clinton in that position. So you got 4 committees, all anxious, 5, even 6, anxious to say, oh, yes, we support the inquiry's recommendation that there should be an impeachment vote. Now, when that happens, when we see the wording of that vote, it is highly likely the Senate will simply reject it and they won't even consider it. It does not have to go to the Senate if they reject it because the investigation has been, what would you call it, spoiled.
Yeah, but you got Mitch McConnell over the Senate, who's an unknown factor.
Mitt Romney, the richest member of the resistance and anti-Trumpism, could certainly, but they're not going to get 20 votes. And the deal is they're not going to waste their time. And the deal is, if they're smart, for procedural reasons, they won't even consider it. And if John Roberts actually considers the case, he should be impeached because there's no evidence.
Yes, but the globalists have either blackmailed or they bankrolled these people for a long time, Thomas.
But even if he is impeached, guess what, folks? They have to give a judgment. Well, the judgment might be, okay, he has to comb his hair from the other side from now on. There, that's the judgment. It can be anything the court decides. Because why? There's no crimes. So even if they impeached him, it means he remains president. It means they've now really made the Republicans angry. They've really shown who the never-Trumpers are. And the Democrats have put a noose around their neck and jumped off the gallows. It's just unbelievable what we're witnessing. So it's completely a farce. And until these procedural nonsense plays itself out, it's all been planned, and it's been demonstrated by numerous writers that these plans started a year ago when they started changing the forms that secondhand information can be turned in for whistleblowers, or that you can turn in people who are in a senior position above you, and you don't have the information to make a determination on whether what they're doing is right or wrong anyway. So why are you turning them in, and why is anyone listening to you? So the IG get these all the time, and they just laugh at the people. I've seen these. I've been part of them many times. They're nothing. They're a way to protect your interior people who you love and get rid of those you don't. And the ones you get rid of they're those crybabies. They're the snowflakes. They're the soy boys who say, oh, you're doing this wrong. It's just like over at Facebook. They're all crying because they now are waking up after all this time to the evil of the mark of the Zuckerbeast.
Now, look, for our British patriots, we want to let you know that there's an article we have on the Cat Report today, and the headline reads, British deep state now saying Brexit election had Russian meddling. They are saying Conservatives knew but covered it up. And guess where the intel and reporting from this story came from? Christopher Steele. Now, you guys over there in the UK, you know all about Christopher Steele, and you know how he was involved with writing the Russian dossier over here. Now, he probably just took off the dossier, I don't know, changed the names and did it again. I mean, these people, they don't understand they're being exposed worldwide by the lightning speed of the internet.
Betsy, that staggers even me. He is under indictment for what he's done because of these lawsuits. He can't say or do anything because he's been involved in nothing but scams. He's just like Dmitry Alperovich. So if Christopher Steele is involved in saying there's Russian meddling in the first vote, wrong. That was George Soros, and George Soros did it on purpose. He did it through an NGO that used a Canadian company, and he overpaid them on purpose so that later he could pull the rug out and say, you were overpaid, which shows that the vote was was wrong. We've already done an entire reveal on this, an entire intelligence report showing the way that George Soros already tried once to abnegate that vote. That's what he does. Even long after a vote, he abnegates the vote. By another vote? Well, that doesn't even make sense. By 10,000 people he put on the street to go door to door and basically threaten people? He did that. By threatening everyone in the European Union, everybody who's working with Britain, everybody in the parliament, and threatening everybody, he threatened everybody. And in the end, he uses Christopher Steele, the most disreputable. Remember, Christopher Steele sat on the desk for Russia. He does. I do not believe he speaks fluent Russian. He doesn't know any Russians. He's never even been to Russia. He had to get Russian names by pulling them out of a hat. He doesn't know anything, and the whole thing was Nellie Orr. Oh, here's my question for you. Couldn't you have gotten some better names than what you pulled off of a ham radio? Really? Nellie, you did a bad job. And John Brennan, couldn't you have got better names for the GRU than the people who met with you during the Trump campaign? Before folks, Crossfire Hurricane was started, Mr. Brennan, as the CIA representative, undercover, went to Russia. But it wasn't undercover because the Russians said, you're not going undercover. We're telling everybody what you're doing. So he goes over and he doesn't even meet with his co-equal. He meets with a different department, and nobody knows why, and he brings a bunch of people with him, and then they come back. And nothing happened. Nobody knows of anything happening. Here's what happened. He got the 13 names that he gave to Robert Mueller that they're saying are the Russians who are the GRU agents who were charged during the Russian Mueller Special Counsel investigation. I guarantee you. Because those were active names of people actively in, basically, under, like the NSA. From Russia. Why? Because that's who he asked to meet with, because he was probably, I'm going to start a new program and I need to meet with your top analysts from bump, 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 bump. And so he did. He made some horse manure, and then he came back and he used those names against them. So call those people over. Call the people from Concord Catering who are named by Mueller. Call them in. See what they can tell you, because some of them are, in fact, they're Russians and some are Ukrainian. Some are Ukrainian born. So we can also call in Sergei Milian Parachenko, because he's the one that John Brennan sent over to get the PP tape, supposedly the compromise material from Russia. And we also need to call in Victoria Nuland and ask her, who was it that called you from Ukraine, who got a call from Estonia? And so I called John Brennan, and that's started the Crossfire Hurricane investigation because of a, what is it, 1, 2, 3, fifth, sixth hand referenced to a telephone that said, oh, the Russians have compromised on Trump. And we have just spent literally hundreds of millions of dollars on this to prove that Trump is as clean as Mr. Clean.
Okay, wrap it up, because we need to make sure that people understand this lawsuit against Jim Jordan, this one with the wrestling coach, back in the day when he was in college. But it's Perkins Coie Law Firm that's pushing the issue. And our audience knows who Perkins Coie is, and I expect that they're going to really be pushing hard on Jim Jordan because he knows it all.
Perkins Coie came in and made a deal with the people, because remember, as soon as they named this guy, no one came forward. Perkins Coie got involved. A few snowflakes came forward, soy boys, and they said, oh, he touched me and he's ruined my life and I want damages. So 3 or 4 of them got damages. Of course, Jim Jordan never had to go to him because he was healthy as a horse and he didn't know anything about this. And none of those guys are going to say, when the doctor grabs my testicles, tells me to turn to the left and cough, he gets a little friendly. And if you said that and you were in sports, you get kicked out. You just accused the doctor of all these teams of doing what?
Well, I didn't expect you to go into that detail. But
I'm sorry. Okay. This is the reality.
It is.
So Jim Jordan knew nothing of that, and that was a setup by Perkins Coie. That was a Hillary Clinton inside attack.
Mark Elias.
Funded by, of course, led by Mark Elias and funded by Penn Quarter Group, with the $50 million still being used to come up with Trump trash and Trump schmear. And so all you got to do is go get Daniel Jones, who was the assistant to Dianne Feinstein, who was, of course, working directly under the largest leak ever found, and for the shortest period of time ever spent in jail, that was James Wolfe with Alvy Watkins. And you find that Daniel Jones went out and got $50 million from anyone who's going on Breitbart from Hollywood. They paid. Oleg Deripaska, Blavatnik, and a few others. So Russians are still paying for smear on Trump. Those aren't the good Russians. Those aren't the Putin Russians. Those are the Russians who hate Trump. Why? Because one of them had a tariff put on him for aluminum, and it's ruined his life. He's called Oleg Deripaska. He was approached by the FBI and CIA and asked to be an agent to work against Trump even during the election. It makes me so mad because John McCain met with him, not Trump.
Okay, as you were going through all those names, you reminded me that there's something that you keep wanting to say to folks when the microphone's on, and we keep forgetting. And I'm going to just say Henry Kerner and the whistleblowers.
Henry Kerner went from being John McCain's assistant, so that means one of the most powerful war hawks. And he uses the McCain Institute and the money they launder through there with offshore accounts and the stuff you see, which is millions of absolute illegal laundering money, both for John McCain's campaign and just up front with whatever he wants to do. McCain won't answer a question. Before he died, he would not answer a question about the McCain Institute. Anyway, Kerner was his active politician who was able to weave in and out. So he weaved in and out of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he controlled James Wolfe. He controlled, believe it or not, he worked with Zainab Anab, he worked with Andy Weissman, and he worked with John Carlin, all who received the Christopher Steele dossier from the hand of Bruce Orr.
But now with Henry Kerner, wasn't he the bottleneck for all the whistleblowers?
He's now in charge of them.
All the whistleblower complaints have to go through him, and he is a Democrat operative? John
McCain might as well still be alive in some of these people because he is a horrible Democrat operative. He's an anti-American. He's in all of the right, all the proper far left groups, and he has complete control of what whistleblowers come to light and how. So the current whistleblowing, put it in his lap. It's all his fault. It's the worst in history ever. Schiff and his whole staff coached this person illegally. They all need to go to jail.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question. I know the answer, and I know it's going to take a while, so wrap it up after this one. Why in the world is Jeff Sessions running for the Senate again?
To keep his lines of corruption going. He found that he wasn't able to pay his bills because all of his offshore accounts were closed because he didn't do his job. Remember, Jeff Sessions came forward and baited Trump. And remember, Trump has gone for every baiting, and Jeff Sessions was the absolute iconic baiting of Trump. We believe in you and for the border. Put up the border. Oh, I'm with you with this and with you with that. And then all of a sudden he joins his team and starts backing off of what he said to begin with until pretty soon he's not even a Trumper. He's an anti-Trumper. And at the most critical point, gives the entire Department of Justice...
In U.S. history.
Yes.
Now, this isn't just
Benedict
between
Arnold.
Sessions and Trump. This is between Sessions and the American people.
He's Benedict Arnold. He is a traitor. And because... Here's how I prove this. Remember, early on, after he recused himself, they found the tapes to the telephone conversations with Keselak. He listened to them and said, "Oh, it's just as I thought. I never brought up sanctions with him. Why would I have?" That is why he recused himself. That was early on. That was so early on. He could have been right there before Comey was fired. He could have said, "Oh, I unrecused myself. This is a lie. This was a deep state shadow government setup."
But he is a senior executive service operative just doing what he was told to do.
He has to get the rat lines of corruption in the state back to where they were.
And plus, he left Uranium One and his corruption on the CFIUS committee wide open.
CFIUS should have stopped Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, John Kerry, Christopher Hines, Hillary Clinton, Pelosi's nephew, and Coffer Black, who is the right hand of Mitt Romney in Ukraine. It should have stopped all of them, but it didn't. So what we see here is outright corruption that didn't even care that they get caught. They were certain that if they get caught, they'd get off. Look at it. $1.5 billion in China. I just want to point something out to you. That would be the biggest deal anybody's got in China. And it went to a guy who knows nothing about what he supposedly took the Chinese money for. They're going to come after him. In the end, he and his family will all suffer, just like Joe Biden, just like Hillary Clinton and her family is suffering. And they have to stay on the campaign trail if they want to get the antidote from China, because China controls them. And they had gone over to Russia. They tried to get Russia. That's the uranium deal, right? Uranium One deal, CFIUS. Now, they tried to sell out China and go for Russia, and China didn't go for that. And so soon, you're going to see China doing really crazy things, but they won't have the money to do it. And the more they do, the less money they'll get. And so we won't ever have to go to war with China unless it's economic.